Well, we've got 3.5 minutes until it's time to start recording. We're already live streaming. Yeah, so mm, how much time did you have to go over the papers from today?
I just listened to him again. I was sleeping.
I yeah, I did the same thing. I slept most of the day, so I didn't get much more done. But I've read over them. I've read over them once, and uh, we're going to be reading them through here anyway. Of talking about it, so it'd be a nice fresh take. Uh, on just before we get started here, uh, I just
Let's try
became
to keep it to 2 hours because we went 2.5 hours last time.
yeah. We'll try to keep it down because I got to run over to CVS and then go drop off a check when this is done, which you know we still have plenty of time. But before we get started, this politically provoked. They have a new thing. Todd has made his own new thing, separate from politically provoked, which he's now entrusted me to moderate that particular Discord. So we may be able to get some new fresh content and uh interesting debates out of there soon. Not sure how soon, but soon, since I just got the invite to be the moderator for it today. So it'll be pretty fun. And it, you know, as I was sitting back, and if we still got about a minute before we get started here, I want to share. Well, I don't want to share it with the screen because I don't want people to see our analytics. But when I'm looking here at our
What the hell
analytics,
is your background?
oh, that was gameplay footage of me.
Oh. Is it
Yeah.
just on a loop?
No, it's on a loop of a video that I recorded of myself playing the game through my computer, and I just downloaded it and put it in there. I didn't even know I could do that, but I did it one day, and it's on there. So it's just playing as much as I allowed to play. So I think the video in total is like 15 minutes, and after the 15 minutes is over with, it starts back over from the very beginning. I'm going to make a new video. I don't know of what, but it'll be of something, and it's going to be my new background. And let's see. But I wanted to talk to you. We got 30 seconds left before we get started with the show. But have you seen this on the of the analytics? I go when you go on the audience size, you know, we get 46% of our United States audience comes here out of Mississippi. And what I find interesting is that we have 2% viewership in Jackson, which I didn't think we could get anybody out of Jackson, but we got 2% out of Jackson. Well, there's the alarm saying that the show's about to get started. But we have also, if you look here, let me go back here. Seminary. I've never even been to seminary, but we've got good viewership up there in seminary as well. But most of our views seems to be coming from Gulfport, Hattiesburg, Palm Beach, and Brandon. Brandon also been really close to Jackson. I wouldn't have expected that. And then
Yeah, my dad was born in Brandon.
and that might explain
Well, no,
that.
because it wouldn't explain it because no family of ours still lives there and hasn't for a long time.
But then we got uh 18% out of Texas. I got family over there. I don't know anybody that lives in Georgia, but we got 14% viewership in Georgia. I mean, I probably know somebody that lives in Georgia, but not really. And
I can't think of anybody.
Illinois,
I don't know
we have
anybody there either.
100% of our viewership in Illinois comes from Streamwood, Illinois. I didn't even know Streamwood was a city. I've never heard of it before. But I'm so happy that we got the viewership from you guys. We appreciate it. I just wanted to give you all a shout out that we appreciate you for viewing our show. But I'm also looking here. We go. I guess we're gonna have to start plugging Apple a lot more. 53% of our viewership now comes from Apple Podcasts, as opposed to 33% from Spotify and 14% from other web browsers. So, love Apple Podcast. They are doing a terrific job of getting our message across, getting our platform out there and everything. So, absolutely love Apple Podcast for what they've been doing with us and allowing us to, I thought we were going to get taken off the air with Apple podcast, but we seem to be doing pretty good despite not even doing
We
any
say stuff
advertising.
all the time that would get us kicked off YouTube.
Yeah, just
Um,
mentioning COVID gets us kicked off
well, yeah,
YouTube.
mentioning COVID, if you call for, there's like a couple things that they don't like you to cuss within the first like 10 to 15 minutes for some reason. That's some with the algorithm. You can't call for violence of any kind. I mean, you shouldn't anyway, but of any kind, in any context, it's never okay. Obviously, you can't say vaccine, you can't say rape, you can't say, there's just certain words that the algorithm will pick up on. And
Well, so far YouTube has only kicked us off for apparently COVID stuff. I haven't been
well,
kicked
I don't
off.
really like talking about COVID anymore anyway. So
Me neither, because it's dead. I mean, Joe Biden got COVID twice, and he's got 4 booster shots.
let's be clear. He got the phantom COVID.
And he's got 4 booster shots. So, I YouTube would kick us off if I say anything negative about the vaccine. So I'm not even going to say it. But you kind of get where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So, anywho, let's go ahead and get on with the show. So I'm going to record on this computer. Uh, it will be on the computer, but it won't be on the computer because of space. Good day, everybody, and welcome to the Story of America with me, your host DeAndre Pace, and my co-host Rhett Williams, who I will not compliment in this introduction this time. All right. And I found this little thing here that I can do. Listen to that. Yeah. Give us some applause going on there.
Can't hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it? Well, I guess it's only me who can hear it, who can hear it. Uh if I plugged in my sound box and played the applause to the sound box, you'd be able to hear my applause record. Anyhow, on today's episode, we are covering the next 10, or not 10, next 5 numbers of the Federalist Papers by our founders, particularly that being Alexander Hamilton, and in this case, one paper by James Madison. As of last time, I will allow my co-host Rhett to start off, because this was his idea, and you get to have a wonderful take on both of our opinions as it relates to these papers and how important they are to understanding our Constitution, and which is the building blocks of understanding our country and why you should vote the way that you vote.
I think that these papers 6 through 10, obviously they after this they're going to be getting into all kinds of different things. Um, I even skipped forward a bit and I was looking at,
You
you
cheater.
know, how to elect the president and all this different stuff. But the 6 through 10 specifically, I think will probably be more immediately relevant to us today because they concern dangers from dissensions between the states and the dangers of domestic insurrections and uprisings, which we have been experiencing a lot of lately. So I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Yes, from our not so uh kind liberal friends who love to tell us how much better they are than we are.
Well, They actually did have a lot of insurrections in the early days.
Well,
Most notably Shays Rebellion, which is kind of the thing that led them to thinking, well, hey, we need to get rid of these articles because we can't do anything about this.
true, true. And well, as I was reading through these papers, to me, reading through particularly number 6, uh makes me long for a convention of states all the more as an immediate solution to the mess that we're in right now.
Dude, I've thought about that so much. I'm like, this is something that's never happened. This is something that needs to happen. I want to be there.
I hope that we will be there when it happens. Because if it
Really.
doesn't if it doesn't happen while we're alive, then it will never happen. And I mean
Yeah.
that's just the way I feel, because
Maybe
I
we get
feel
to
like,
have some input there as the delegation from Mississippi.
yes, I think that would be wonderful for us to be able to show up and cane Nancy Pelosi.
I don't think Nancy would be there. She'd be trying to get us shut down. If she's still alive. If not, it'd be
Yeah.
her ghost.
Well, if she doesn't get shot down in the Pacific.
The ghost of Nancy Pelosi will be there.
Oh man. So
You know what I mean? She's going to be one of those hungry ghosts. She's got unfinished business.
Her and Chuck the Smuck.
Yeah.
And Turtleneck Mitch will be right along with him.
Those hangry phantoms.
Yes.
You awesome. Know they're not getting to the next realm. They're going to be stuck here in the mortal realm, but they're going to be dead.
Yeah. And they're gonna be like fucking these here I am cursing already. They're gonna be like Ring Race. They're just gonna be,
yeah, they're gonna be exactly dead, like Ring Race.
Not dead, but not alive.
Somewhere in the middle.
Just stuck here for all eternity.
Disembodied spirits floating around the mortal plane, wishing they could make it to the next life, but they can't because
Satan nobody doesn't want them, and
yeah,
God doesn't want them. You're not allowed in heaven, and Satan doesn't want you, so you're just stuck here.
Yeah, where do you go? Oblivion. That would be the best place for them. Oblivion. But if they go to purgatory, purgatory gives them a second chance. I don't think they deserve that.
Yeah, they should just go back into the void from which they came.
Oblivion, nothingness, non-existence completely. Anyway,
I wish
getting ahead of ourselves
because if they got non-existence, then that means we could just undo everything that they did.
If they don't get non-existence, maybe they can get reincarnated one day, and that
would be horrible. And that would be horrible. Oh, but then again, it depends, because the 6 paths of the Buddha, you can be reincarnated into an animal, into a world where there's constant war, which they would love. They could be reincarnated as a food item and be eaten by somebody.
Unless they were soldiers, they wouldn't love it, but maybe that would be good for them.
Yeah, finally have to put their neck on the line for a change. So, but before we get off topic, as we're known to do sometimes, so let's go. Number 6 is concerning dangers from dissensions between the states, written by Alexander Hamilton in the Independent Journal of November 14th of 1787. He says here, to the people of the state of New York, the 3 last numbers of this paper have been dedicated to an enumeration of the dangers to which we should be exposed in a state of disunion from the arms and arts of foreign nations. I shall now proceed to delineate dangers of a different and perhaps still more alarming kind, those which will in all probability flow from dissensions between the states themselves and from domestic factions and convulsions. These have been already in some instances slightly anticipated, but they deserve a more particular and more full investigation. A man must be far gone in utopian speculations who can seriously doubt that if these states should either be wholly disunited or wholly united in partial confederacies, the subdivisions into which they might be thrown would have frequent and violent contests with each other. To presume a want of motives for such contest as an argument against their existence would be to forget that men are ambitious, vindictive, and rapacious, to look for a continuation of harmony between a number of independent, unconnected sovereignties in the same neighborhood, I would be to disregard the uniform course of human events and to set at defiance the accumulated experience of ages. I want to stop right there and we'll just talk about that for a moment. I think the warning of the utopian speculations really speaks to our friends on the left. They have this delusional idea of utopia that just doesn't exist.
I think
At
that they've
least,
always been that way because, so the Federalists were more like the conservatives back then. Specifically Washington, Hamilton, Madison, Jay, this side. The other, basically the equivalent of the liberals or the left back then would have been Jefferson, Paine, those people, because they do have more of a, I don't want to discredit them by saying something like that, because all of the founders had the tragic view of humankind. They all knew that people weren't perfect and that utopia was impossible. But I really don't know where I'm going with this. Yeah, the left side of the aisle seems to have always been predisposed to imagining humankind as totally free and equal in nature, in this, which is exactly the opposite of the truth. I mean, we are created equal, but that doesn't mean that we're equal in our abilities to survive, even if it goes down to nature. We're talking about in the state of nature, people and animals and everything it's nothing is equal.
I see the same thing. I would describe it as the left, they have illusions of grandeur within the harmonious capabilities of mankind, but it gets deeper in that because they believe that in order to get to that grandeur, everything has to be controlled down to the smallest circumstance, which means that in order for you to be able to live in a utopian world would be to be devoid of all freedom. But if you were to create a world in which that happens, because men, as Hamilton wrote here, are ambitious, vindictive, and rapacious, you are destined to cause violent
Yeah,
skirmishes and uproarings in a
this is
system like that.
why utopia is a dystopia. By definition, they're the same thing, because the only way to achieve it is through tyranny. The only, I think the founders were trying to set up a system that you allowed humans to have as much freedom as possible within the constraints of human nature. This is just, it comes down to the constrained vision versus the unconstrained vision.
A wonderful book by Dr. Thomas Sowell.
Yeah, and it paints this picture quite nicely. These people who are proponents of Marxism is actually under the constrained vision, because I think Marx knew full well that it would take a violent revolution to usher in the utopia at the end. But yeah, it does come down to that.
You see,
And the founders, clearly, all of them, regardless of what their opinions were, had the constrained vision because it's the only one that makes sense.
the only way for you to get a utopian civilization is literally to A, be a tyrant, or B, be God. There's no in between. And if you choose A, then the vision is only utopian to the people who are in power. The people who are not in power, It is not a utopia, not even close in the slightest. But because of the illusion of a utopia by the dictator, the tyrant, as you've seen in the Middle East when Saddam Hussein was in control, everything seems to be perfectly balanced, even though to the rest of the world it looks like they're on the edge of a knife. But within
North
their
Korea,
own,
North
yeah,
Korea, they try to make everything look nice in Pyongyang when people go to visit. Although I have heard from some people who have visited, just listening to podcasts and stuff, that you can tell something's off, obviously. But Kim Jong Un is probably living a great life, but
yeah,
the people
you don't get
are
to be that
starving to
chunky.
death.
You don't get to be that chunky if you're not living good.
He's probably drinking all the time, which would make your life very quickly miserable if you were doing it all the time. So, I mean, but yes, these people, there is no utopia on earth. And nowadays, most of the people that actually think that's possible, they don't actually have any kind of, this is overgeneralizing, but don't have any kind of spiritual view of humanity or our placement in a cosmic narrative.
I was
And
thinking the
so
same
that they
thing as you were
think that
saying
you
that.
can create a scientific utopia when they
And
don't even admit to the fact that this world is just, if you open your eyes, it's clear to see that they're never going to be, we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to be our best selves. We're never going to create utopia. And all you have to do is live a little bit to learn that.
yeah, and it doesn't take very much. You don't have to live a long time to experience this and rationalize it. And I've come to learn over my years as a pursuing scientist in various fields and as a creationist that you cannot separate science from spirituality and faith. The two are not mutually exclusive, but
Right.
rather they are part of the same coin and they need one another to, and or see the spirit. If we believe that everything is inspired by God, the science is inspired by our belief. And so in order for you to invent, which is a replication of creation in human terms, in order for you to be able to invent something, you have to have envisioned it. And if we believe that those visions come from the spirit of God who speaks it to us, we cannot exclude those things from one another. We can't exclude, we can't uh have them be separated from one another, because you need both. And me personally, I believe that a great degree of skepticism is necessary to balance both science and religion,
Yeah, that's what
particularly
made the West so great.
particularly because not to be skeptical of the existence of God, but to be skeptical of the people who claim to be emissaries of him.
I think I think it's perfectly fine to be skeptical of anything you want to be skeptical about, but I don't think it should be done from a spirit of trying to tear something apart, but rather from a spirit of learning. Because that's what really led me to start looking into all of this stuff. I'm at the point where now it does not matter what scientific discoveries are made, because scripture should not be read in a sort of fundamentalist sense where it's literally always exactly what it's saying, word for word, verbatim. Um, I forgot where I was going with this. Oh, the main problem that I see when I've listened to all the major atheists. I've listened to all of it. I've researched all of it. And when I hear them talk about God, it seems like they're talking about they're talking about a caricature, as if God is a being, a created being within the world that is made of atoms that we can go find, rather than, I think the proper way to think of it in an analogy would be like book to author, because
that's the way I envision it as well. Because when I'm writing, I don't know if you do the same thing when you're writing, but when I'm writing, I can't help but think to myself, this must be how God did it when he was
well,
creating this
I think
world.
it's something like that. Obviously, we can't 100% know really what it was like, but I think that's probably a good analogy for it, because all we can really do when we speak of God is use analogies, because we don't really.
It's beyond human comprehension.
Yes,
The
it's.
con you see that, and that's one of the things that I love about the philosophical aspects of theology
Yeah, me too.
and religion is there are several concepts that exist that human beings cannot comprehend. The concept of time, though we know what it is, we cannot comprehend its existence because we weren't there at the beginning of time to know when time started or how time, the reason why we can't figure out time travel is because we don't understand how time flows. Does it flow
Yeah.
unilaterally or does it flow
Well,
in multiple directions?
we don't
Ma-
even know what time is.
Matter,
Mm,
space, uh,
really.
distance, everything is relative to us, but conceptually, it is beyond our scope of reason for us to be able to piece together these things. And so, I think one of the most fascinating ideas that I see of explanations of God actually comes from DC Comics when they did the Final Crisis storyline all those years ago, which had new gods like Darkseid existing outside of the multiverse, and they just kind of peek in, but they exist by their own concepts. And I'm not saying that this is what our God is, but they exist in their own concept, in their own set of rules, that if we try to perceive it, we would not be able to get in there. For example, the reason why Mixix Spitlick can come in there and mess with Superman and just create all types of worlds is because he's a fifth dimensional being. So he can come into to a 3D dimensional realm and just do anything. But in his regular world, he has no powers. He's just a normal person. But because he's interacting with a dimension that's like two spaces beneath him, he could just do anything. And I always thought that was very unique when you're dealing with the idea of concepts and how we are unable to comprehend those concepts as to how God creates things. Because I just the idea of creation is something that we can't comprehend.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the analogy that's used is that we use is, of course, words, that God spoke creation into existence. And that act of speaking is what we call the logos, which is actually the creative force that the I am. Because that's a very peculiar. Whenever he tells Moses, "I am who I am," when he asked him his name, but what that tells me is that human beings and self-consciousness, self-awareness, is that aspect of the human being that is the image of God that's in everyone. Because we're able to also say that I am so and so or whatever. We know who we are. So God is literally the act, not the act. Of course, creation would be the act, but he is literally being itself, and what all things have their being in. And most people, when they think of eternity, they think of infinite time. But eternity is really like the center of a circle which connects all moments to itself and from which all time arises.
I think I remember Peter writing, or was it Peter or was it Paul writing about what 1,000 years is like to God, whereas a second to us can be 1,000 years in the eyes of the Lord, which shows you that the scope of time is beyond anything that we can comprehend. So when he says that he created the world in a day, in 7 days, but then you go and you see Paul or Peter, I can't remember which one, write that it's 1,000 years
Yeah,
in
that
his
was
eye,
Peter.
in his eyes. You're sitting there, you're like, okay, was it 6 days or was it 6,000 years?
I think the point he's trying to make is it doesn't matter. The way that the creation story is written out for us to understand it, kind of. It's not a literal
Yeah,
explanation of how it was done, because why would it need to be a certain amount of time? It was probably like that. And of course, the consequences of those words spoken probably took a while to unfold. But anyway, I think we've gone off on a
yeah, we've gone on a tangent there, but it was a nice tangent because our founders, they peddled this in their brains, same as we did. The founders are very religious. Um, I look here and I say, oh, we kind of covered that, but then the next one is even more so uh about the dangers of the utopia. It says that the causes of hostility among nations are innumerable. There are some which have a general and almost constant operation upon the collective bodies of society. Of this description are the love of power or the desire of preeminence and dominion, the jealousy of power, or the desire of equality and safety. Equality and safety, yeah, yeah. There are others which have more circumscribed, uh, though an equally um, operative influence within their spheres. Such are the rivalships and competitions of commerce between commercial nations, and there are others not less numerous than either of the former, which take their origin entirely in private passions and the attachments. Uh, help me with this word here, Rhett. Is it enmities?
where are you at?
Uh,
Yeah,
e-
enmities.
enmities. Yeah, I was peddling that one. Enmities, interests, hopes, and fears of leading individuals and the communities of which they are members. Men of this class, whether the favorites of a king or of a people, have in too many instances abused the confidence they possessed, and assuming the pretext of some public motive, have not scoped it to the sacrifice of the national tranquility to personal advantage or personal gratification. This one, I think the jealousy of power and the desire of equality and safety is precisely what we have going on right now, almost
I actually think that
verbatim.
the 10 is the one that talks about this to the most in the most detail. That what was good about the 6, and we can skip a bunch of this, but to summarize this, number 6 to me is, I like the fact that he goes over so many historical examples. Um, like for instance, Sparta and Athens and Rome and Carthage. So the people were basically making the point that it'll be okay if we split into a couple of confederacies, because we're not going to fight because we have commercial interests with each other, which a lot of times does prevent war, but not always. And these are historical examples that speak otherwise. This was the opponents of the Constitution. We're still going to be trading with each other, so we're not going to fight. But Sparta and Athens, Sparta, warlike; Athens, commercial; Carthage, commercial; Rome, warlike. Yet they still fought. Uh, Carthage, though a commercial republic, was the aggressor in the very war that ended in her destruction. Hannibal had carried her arms into the heart of Italy and to the gates of Rome before Scipio, in turn, gave him an overthrow in the territories of Carthage and made a conquest of the Commonwealth. And then it goes on to Venice, which it was a nation state at one time, and Holland, the Netherlands, France. All of these historical examples of commercial cultures that got into war anyway, proving the point that if we're going to be separated, trading with each other is not going to prevent war.
Oh, precisely. Because if trade alone was what would prevent war, World War One and Two would never have happened. Vietnam would never have happened. The Korean War would never have happened. Really, any major war that wasn't about expanding territory would never have happened. And even in territorial wars, it was largely about commerce as well.
We wouldn't have to worry about war with China for sure.
Yeah, we wouldn't have to worry about China shooting Pelosi down.
So that's an example right now that's happening. We trade with China more than anybody else. They trade with us more than anybody else, and that's
And
not
you,
stopping anything.
but and you know, and in many cases, I believe that unilateral trade, or should I say, monopolistic trade, in the cases with China, actually beckons conflict more than it does to resolve it, because eventually it's going to get to the point where you can't afford not to trade with certain with set trading partner, because you have uh, domesticated so much your products to one particular trading partner that you cannot separate from that. And in doing so, you wind up in a system in which you are now no longer capable of staving off war, because nothing that you can do is going to change or harm your trading partner, because if you do, it's going to harm your society. So if we cut off all ties to China right now, they produce the majority of our product.
Yeah, if we think the supply
It
chain
hurts
crisis is bad now,
it hurts
that'll
us stupendously. So in order to get out of this type of thing, eventually you will be led to blows.
yeah, there's no way to peacefully stop trading at that level. So in some ways, I understand the sentiment of, you know, countries that trade don't go to war, because a lot of times that's true, but it's not necessarily a guarantee and it's not a rule. And it can lead to worse wars in the long run,
Yes.
which is definitely going to be the case with us and the Chinese.
I think with everything, it is important to relegate moderation with trade. If, for example, we will have a much easier time being able to pressure China not to go to war, not to take Taiwan, if 70% of our products weren't created in China. If we had most of our product domesticated and we had an equal share of trade in various different regions of the world, as opposed to a vast monopoly of our trade coming from one region of the world, we wouldn't have to skirt ice with them. We could pull back and take that particular uh, supply that we're getting from China and move it someplace else. And that would encourage China to kick back on some of the aggression, or at least in the best case scenario, it would. But when you have so much product in one area, you can't do that. You can't pull back all of that, because you don't have anybody else that is capable of filling the void immediately.
Yeah, that's definitely, we're on a collision course. But this, in Hamilton's very poetic way of writing, the best line in the first one that sums it all up: is it not time to awake from the deceitful dream of a golden age, and to adopt as a practical maxim for the direction of our political conduct that we, as well as the other inhabitants of the globe, are yet remote from the happy empire of perfect wisdom and perfect virtue? Let the point of extreme depression to which our national dignity and credit have sunk, let the inconveniences felt everywhere from the lax and ill administration of government, let the revolt of a part of the state of North Carolina, the late menacing disturbances in Pennsylvania, and the actual insurrections and rebellions in Massachusetts declare: So far, in the general sense of mankind, corresponding with the tenets of those who endeavor to lull asleep our apprehensions of discord and hostility between the states, in the event of disunion, that it has from long observation of the progress of society become a sort of axiom in politics that vicinity or nearness of situation constitutes nations natural enemies. An intelligent writer expresses himself on the subject to this effect. Neighboring nations, says he, are naturally enemies of each other, unless their common weakness forces them to league in a confederate republic, and their constitution prevents the differences that neighborhood occasions, extinguishing that secret jealousy which disposes all states to aggrandize themselves at the expense of their neighbors. This passage at the same time points out the evil and suggests the remedy.
I would agree, and I think also um, a good summation of it comes in his first paragraph of Federalist number 7, which really the first sentence of that paragraph is, it is sometimes asked with an air of seeing triumph, what inducements could the states have if disunited to make war upon each other? A very plain question. And I mean, you have to think how long they had to peddle this. I mean, if we let's assume that we did uh be multiple confederacies and that we were all in different places. I mean, do you honestly see after the 2020 election there being any degree of civility between a place like Mississippi and a place like Washington State, where Washington State, they completely abandon uh, their police, they completely abandon their uh, reason, their logic. They've cowed down to the
I
criminals.
think it's more of a problem because, I mean, there's people in these blue states in the rural areas that think just like we do, or at least somewhat close. I think it's more of a urban versus rural, or more metropolis versus the rest of the country. But
I would agree
I
with
think
that
that's going to cause a
second
lot of
part.
people to start moving away from these blue states. It already has started to cause that.
Yeah, but then that causes significantly more problems because it causes more states to be on the verge of turning purple.
Not not if they're moving away. What I'm saying is people moving from red counties in blue states to red states, not blue voters. Although that's happening too.
But yeah, but
That's not what I'm talking about.
I understand what you're saying, but I see it more the blue voter than the red voter because, for example, I have some friends in New York City, and I tell them, why don't you guys just go to Florida? Why don't you guys just come to Mississippi, come someplace else where you have to go to Texas, no state tax, it's safer, and they they just love New York. They have so much pride that they would rather move to uh, upper New York, around Albany,
I mean, it's better.
upstate,
I'm
than
not really
actually leave the city. But the people in the city, they aren't fleeing because they don't like the policies. They're fleeing because they don't like how much money it costs. And then they go to a red state and a blue city in a red state and vote the exact same way.
this is all beside the point of what I was saying. The movement's happening for whatever reason, regardless. And I don't even remember why I brought that up. Oh yeah, well, I was talking about people in red counties and blue states
Yeah, I
because the
seen.
problem is more so. I mean, on the electoral map, you see blue and red in states, but a lot of people in upstate New York are conservative.
Yeah, I looked at it on a county level. New York, the entirety of New York was red except for New York City and right around Brooklyn, not Brooklyn, Buffalo, right around Buffalo. Everything else was red. However, New York City has 10 million residents. So it outnumbers the rest of the state by a significant margin.
This is exactly what he touches on here in this one. So the opportunities which some states would have of rendering others tributary to them by commercial regulations would be impatiently submitted by the tributary states. The relative situation of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey would afford an example of this kind. New York, from the necessities of revenue, must lay duties on her importations. A great part of these duties must be paid by the inhabitants of the two other states in the capacity of consumers of what we import. New York would neither be willing nor able to forego this advantage. Her citizens would not consent that a duty paid by them should be remitted in favor of the citizens of her neighbors, nor would it be practicable. If there were not this impediment in the way to distinguish the customers in our own markets, would Connecticut and New Jersey long submit to be taxed by New York for her exclusive benefit? Should we be long permitted to remain in the quiet and undisturbed enjoyment of a metropolis from the possession of which we derived an advantage so odious to our neighbors and, in their opinion, so oppressive? Should we be able to preserve it against the incumbent weight of Connecticut on the one side and the cooperating pressure of New Jersey on the other? These are questions that temerity alone will answer in the affirmative. Anyway, so I think that definitely applies to what we're speaking of, because New York was already the most populous city back then. And these problems were already arising of people who lived in rural areas versus metropolises like New York. And this is the whole reason for the Electoral College, which people are so thick-skulled that they can't understand or they don't care. The fact that we are not one country, we are states that decided to join together for all of these benefits, mostly foreign relations, because we'd be stronger together rather than separated. But they want to try to now act like we're just one country and not 50 states that formed a federal government for their mutual benefit.
And they want to remove the Electoral College in order to eliminate any dissenting opinions. You know,
Let's be clear here. The left wants to get rid of states entirely. They
I
just
don't think
want
I
one
don't think they
country.
want to. I don't think they want to get rid of states entirely. They want to get rid of.
They do.
They want to get rid of uh, red people's
They want to get
opinion.
rid of states. If they got rid of states and we just voted as a country, they'd win every time because they live in those cities where
Yeah,
most of the population is.
that govern everything. And
All they'd have to do is
do you
campaign in New York and LA.
do you believe that if we were to have a convention of states, that it would be almost essential for us to have an electoral college on a state level as well as federal?
Why?
So that, for example, in New York City, when it's time for them to get ready to vote for their governor, rather than New York City controlling the entirety of the vote for governor in New York State, the other counties will have will have an equal degree of say.
I mean, you could talk about that, but that would have to be decided on a state by state level. We couldn't require each state to do it. I mean, the states that wanted to, sure, but you're talking about like an apportionment of delegates by county or district.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would have to be decided on a state by state level because we couldn't mandate that from the federal.
I would agree. I just thought it might be an interesting idea that because and the problem has become is that some states have become so populous that they are in essence small countries.
Well, I mean, you could, in a way, you could think of all the states like that. not just necessarily based on land size. I mean, that too, but you look at the countries of Europe. I mean, many of our states are much larger than a lot of the countries of Europe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the United States is actually bigger than Europe, I believe. It's close to the same size, but I think it's slightly larger. So, yeah, Texas, of course, was a country. Uh, but yeah, I do think of us not quite as a country of countries because the UK would be an example of that. But our system is set up almost like that. The states just give certain powers to the federal government. But if that wasn't the case, then the states are, I mean, they are semi autonomous, although the federal government seems to want to run over them these days.
I'm not so sure it's the federal government wanting to run over them as it is the states are refusing to accept their responsibility.
Well, I think it's both.
Most likely. Now, number 7 is much the same as number 6. So I want to go on. Number 7, there were some interesting points number 7, but I think most of that can be divvied up.
And yeah, this 8, it goes on to the next topic. We're already an hour in.
Let's go on to number 8. The consequences of hostility between the states. This is by Hamilton on November 20th. Oh, this is from the New York Packet, and most of them have been from the Independent Journal. This is from the New York Packet of November 20th of 1787. I would say 1987, which I wish this came out in 1987. It would be so much better for us right now.
Why
Well,
would
I
that
don't know.
matter?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we might be worse. Oh, anyways, it says, assuming it is therefore as an established truth that the several states, in case of disunion or such combination of them as might happen to be formed out of the wreck of the general confederacy, will be subject to those um this dang I can't
Vicissitudes.
yeah I didn't want to mess that one up. Vicissitudes of peace and war, of friendship and enmity with each other, which have fallen to the lot of all neighboring nations not united under one government. Let us enter into a concise detail of some of the consequences that would attend such a situation. And these are the consequences. War between the states in the first period of their separate existence would be accompanied by with much greater distress than it commonly is in those countries where regular military establishments have long obtained. The disciplined armies always kept on foot on the continent of Europe, though they bear a malignant aspect to liberty and economy, have notwithstanding been productive of the signal advantage of rendering sudden conquest impracticable and of preventing the rapid desolation which used to mark the progress of war prior to their introduction. The art of fortification has contributed the same ends. Ah, man, my lips are so dry. The nation of Europe, the nations of Europe are encircled with chains of fortified places which mutually obstruct invasions. Campaigns are wasted in reducing 2 or 3 frontier garrisons to gain admittance into the enemy's country. Similar impediments occur at every step to exhaust the strength and delay the progress of an invader. Formerly, an invading army would penetrate into the heart of a neighboring country almost as soon as intelligence of its approach would be received, but now a comparatively small force of disciplined troops acting on the defensive with the aid of posts is able to impede and finally to frustrate the enterprises of one much more considerable. The history of war in that quarter of the globe is no longer a history of nations subdued and empires overturned, but of towns taken and retaken, of the battles that decide nothing, of retreats more beneficial than victories, of much effort and little acquisition. In this country, the scene would be altogether reversed. The jealousy of military establishments would postpone them as long as possible. The want of fortifications leaving the frontiers of the state open to another would facilitate inroads. The populous states would, with little difficulty, overrun their less populous neighbors. Conquest would be as easy to be made as difficult to be retained. War, therefore, would be desultory and predatory. Plunder and devastation ever march in the train of irregulars. The calamities of individuals would make the principal figure in the events which would characterize our military exploits. This picture is not too highly wrought, though I confess it would not long remain a just one. Safety. My lips are so dry. Give me a second. I gotta put some chapstick on there. Hate having dry lips. Okay. Safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct. Even the ardent love of liberty will, after a time, give way to its dictates. The violent destruction of life and property incident to war, the continual effort and alarm attended on a state of continual danger will compel nations the most attached to liberty to resort for repose and security to institutions which have a tendency to destroy their civil and political rights. To be more safe, they at length become willing to run the risk of being less free. I'll just read the next paragraph too, because I think it's kind of important. The institutions chiefly alluded to the standing armies and the correspondent appendages of military establishments. Standing armies, it is said, are not provided against in the new constitution. It is therefore inferred that they may exist under it. Their existence, however, from the very terms of this proposition, is at most problematic and uncertain. But standing armies, it may be replied, must inevitably result from a dissolution of the Confederacy. Frequent war and constant apprehensions, which requires a state of constant preparation, will infallibly produce them. The weaker states or confederacies would first have recourse to them to put themselves upon an equality with the more potent neighbors. They would endeavor to supply the inferiority of population and resources by a more regular and effective system of defense, by disciplined troops, and by fortifications. They would at the same time be necessitated to strengthen the executive arm of government, in doing which their constitutions would acquire a progressive directions toward monarchy. It is of the nature of war to increase the executive at the expense of the legislative authority. So when I'm reading this, these I don't know how to say it other than it so perfectly exemplifies the problem with why we are teetering on the edge of potential civil war, when you have some states that feel like they have been so overrun and left out by larger states, and some smaller counties within larger states. So as you were talking about the red flight from blue states to red states, feeling overrun and overtaken by the larger population of these metropolitan areas. And the danger that would come from doing that is that these smaller states would have to be more prepared militarily than larger states.
That's so at the end here, he's talking about all the advantages that Britain has had being an island that's not part of continental Europe. So it isn't as necessary to have standing armies within in their country like it has been for the nations of continental Europe, because they're all so close together and they're different countries. And the point he's trying to make here at the last couple of paragraphs, he's saying, I think we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but we so I'm just going to read the last two paragraphs because I could summarize it, but I'd rather just get it all out there. If we are wise enough to preserve the Union, we may for ages enjoy an advantage similar to that of an insulated situation, in reference to Britain, insulated from the wars and standing armies of Europe. Europe is at a great distance from us. Her colonies in our vicinity will be likely to continue too much disproportioned in her strength to be capable to give us any dangerous annoyance. Extensive military establishments cannot, in this position, be necessary to our security. But if we should be disunited, and the integral parts should either remain separated, or, which is most probable, should be thrown together in 2 or 3 confederacies, we should be, in a short course of time, in the predicament of the continental powers of Europe. Our liberties would be a prey to the means of defending ourselves against the ambition and jealousy of each other. This is an idea not superficial or futile, but solid and weighty. It deserves the most serious and mature consideration of every prudent and honest man of whatever party. If such men will make a firm and solemn pause and meditate dispassionately on the importance of this interesting idea, if they will contemplate it in all its attitudes and trace it to all its consequences, they will not hesitate to part with trivial objections to a constitution, the rejections of which would in all probability put a final period on the Union. The airy phantoms that flit before the distempered imaginations of some of its adversaries will quickly give place to the more substantial forms of dangers, real, certain, and formidable.
Which I think is an accurate summation of what I read in the first 3 paragraphs, or I think 4 paragraphs. But it just goes to show the dangers, or which is the title of these papers, but the dangers of having the United States of America infight and having us be separated rather than being as one united people. And the liberal viewpoint, as you alluded to earlier, would say, just get rid of all of the states, be one nation. You don't have to worry about the infighting if you get rid of all of the states and just have one united police force. Well, that wouldn't work, because then you would disenfranchise the vast majority of the country that does not believe that the systems that we're following right now are correct. It's only those people who live in the massively populated areas that will have power. And that would just cause more internal strife and struggle.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very careful in the way that I say this. There's a poll that came out recently talking about civil war, but more specifically, the assassination of political leaders and the desire to participate in a revolution. So more Democrats supported assassination of political enemies. And the number one group that desired to participate in a revolution was young Republican men.
I'm not
I think that
surprised.
that sentiment has been growing on the right for so long that, you know, at that point, a civil war would they'd be equally as bloody. But if the federal government was actually overthrown, that could leave us in an even worse position, because nobody would really know what, unless we had people that were really leading and making sure that we didn't just deteriorate into, the borderlands and the whole country, like fallout. It's just like nobody wants to be here. It's just everything's a wreck. But I
So,
see all of these as possibilities if we don't come to some sort of
well,
agreement.
I'm not entirely shocked by that poll. As you and I have been talking about the possibility of revolutions, though, for the longest period of time, I have held on to the fervent faith and belief that the revolution will be one of ideas rather than of arms. But it seems closer and closer to the likelihood that it may come to arms than it would to ideas, which I hope
The problem
it's
is most people are not capable of making war in the realm of ideas, because you actually have to know some stuff. You can't be stupid.
true.
And I don't think a lot of people are really capable of doing that.
But when I say I'm not shocked at all, when you take a look at the assassination attempts, who have they been by and who have they been towards? When you take a look at the bounties on the heads of Supreme Court justices right now, who are they been by and who are they been towards? When you take a look uh at the congresspersons that have been shot or shot at, who have they been by and who have they been towards? It's been the left. In almost every circumstance in which a president has been assassinated or attempted to be assassinated, it's always been somebody on the left attacking somebody who's more conservative. Abraham Lincoln, assassinated, he was Republican. Attempted assassination of Theodore Roosevelt, he was Republican, though Theodore Roosevelt took it like a boss and finished his speech.
Yeah.
the the attempted assassination, well, not attempted, but the assassination of JFK. He's a Democrat, but he was clearly a fiscal conservative Democrat.
Yeah, that's why he was more of one of those free thinking Democrats. I
I
would
don't.
say that if he was still around today, he might be a Republican. But of course, his brother stayed a Democrat till his
And then
dying day.
Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, conservatives. Malcolm X started off on the left, ended up on the right, and then got killed.
That's just what happens. And this revisionist history about Martin Luther King being a Democrat is ridiculous.
I know it's because Black people don't really know anything about Martin Luther King, other than that
His name.
other than his name, and then they say, well, he fought for civil rights, but they don't actually go research anything about his voter history, because when we do those projects in school, voting history doesn't come up at all.
No, never.
But then again, if you take even look further, closer in modern time, Steve Scalise shot at a baseball game by a Bernie supporter. What's that? I think her name was Deborah. Can't remember her last name. It's a Texas woman senator, not senator, but a congressperson who was running for Congress in Texas. She got shot in the head. She was running on
You're
the
talking about
Republican.
Gabrielle Gifford.
Yeah,
That's in Arizona.
I wasn't. There was one in Texas too, wasn't there?
I don't know.
But she got shot in the head. She was running on a Republican ticket. Shot in the head.
Gabrielle Gifford was a Republican.
No, the person I'm talking about was in Texas, I think.
Gifford is the one who got shot in the head in Arizona while we were in high school.
Maybe I got it wrong.
Oh, let me see. She was a Republican before 2000 and then became a Democrat in 2000. So,
And
yeah.
then you take a look at Donald Trump. There were several events where Donald Trump had to be whisked off the stage because there was claims that somebody had brought a gun to the event.
Well, to be clear, I think most presidents have had assassination attempts, but a lot of times they're just not talked about. But recently, most of the political assassinations and attempts have been by left-leaning individuals, most of them.
Yes. And then Brett Kavanaugh, his family had to be escorted out the back door of a restaurant in order to avoid an angry mob who had their information leaked to them, who came there to do them harm. There was the
It's just
attempted
ridiculous.
assassination of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. This guy sitting outside of his house waiting to take him out. And it's always from the left when it comes to these political uprisings, assassinations. But we're so focused on January 6th when we have actual attempted assassinations of sitting presidents and sitting U.S. justices and congresspersons that no committee was ever created for. So when you start to see the anger bubbling up in conservatives, young Republican men that believe that a revolution is the only way to reclaim justice and equality within our country, it becomes easier and easier to try to justify that means. Though I do not justify the need to go to bloodshed, but it becomes easier to see their point of view and their frustration when the other side can get away with doing so much.
Yeah. So the next one, the utility of the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. Whoa.
Oh
Here we
yeah,
go.
we're getting into the good stuff now.
A firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. If they exhibit occasional calms, these only serve as short-lived contrast to the furious storms that are to succeed. If now and then intervals of felicity open to view, we behold them with a mixture of regret, arising from the reflection that the pleasing scenes before us are soon to be overwhelmed by the tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. If momentary rays of glory break forth from the gloom, while they dazzle us with a transient and fleeting brilliancy, they, at the same time, admonish us to lament the vices, that the vices of government should pervert the direction and tarnish the luster of those bright talents and exalted endowments from which the favored soils that produce them have been so justly celebrated. From the disorders that disfigure the annals of those republics, the advocates of despotism have drawn arguments not only against the forms of republican government, but against the very principles of civil liberty. They have decried all free governments as inconsistent with the order of society, and have indulged themselves in malicious exultation over its friends and partisans. Happily for mankind, stupendous fabrics reared on the basis of liberty, which have flourished for ages, have, in a few glorious instances, refuted their gloomy sophisms. And I trust America will be the broad and solid foundation of other edifices not less magnificent, which will be equally permanent monuments of their errors.
And when I'm looking at this and I'm seeing everything in here, you see that paragraph over there that starts when Montesquieu recommends a small extent for republics. As I was reading over all of these, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, what has Congress done to this nation presently that this is what they consider to be an insurrection? That's what happened on January 6th. When, in my view, according to the way it was framed in the Constitution of the United States, that uh, an insurrection would be an invasion force coming to the country, or that an insurrection would be a violent overtaking of government. Well, in that respect, we have seen insurrections, but January 6th, that was not. We saw insurrections in Arizona when they took over the building. When we saw insurrections throughout 2020 when they set fire to to federal buildings and to justice and to federal into courts. We saw actual insurrections when they took over the entire city of Seattle and renamed it Chop or Chaz, whatever they called it. At first it was Chop, then they called it Chaz because I guess Chop was oppressive or something like that.
Yeah, it, you can only use the term insurrection in the loosest of sense if you want to include January 6th, because it's a violent uprising against an authority or government. But usually it's actually got some planning behind it, and usually they have weapons. There was plenty of domestic insurrections in the early Union. The Shays Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion. That's the two that come to mind. But they were actually standoffs, like with government forces, with weapons, with
Like what
fighting.
happened, like what happened in Seattle with Chaz. When they took over the entire city, refused police officers into the city and stand off with them and actually wound up causing the lives of several people within that occupied zone that they claimed to care about black people. They wanted to protect them from the police officers, but they managed to kill like three of them in their chop zone. But these literal insurrections get no attention by Congress. So when, excuse me for using this analogy, but what do you do when you cry wolf so much, and when an actual real insurrection does happen and nobody cares about it? What are you going to do then?
Like what we basically have started to do. Just ignore it. I mean,
This is the fault that Congress has brought upon themselves, what they've done here. And as I was reading here, if you go on to the next page or two, it says, so far are the suggestions of Montesquieu, from standing in opposition to a general union of the states, that he explicitly treats a confederate republic as the expedient for extending the sphere of the popular government and reconciling the advantages of monarchy with those of republicanism. It is very probable, says he, that mankind would have been obliged at length to live constantly under the government of a single person, had they not contrived a kind of constitution that has all the internal advantages of a republican, together with the external force of a monarchical government. I mean a confederate republic. This form of government is a convention by which several smaller states agree to become members of a larger one which they intend to form. It is a kind of assemblage of societies that constitute a new one, capable of increasing by means of new associations till they arrive to such a degree of power as to be able to provide for the security of the united body. A republic of this kind, able to withstand an external force, may support itself without any internal corruptions. The form of this society prevents all manner of inconveniences. If a single member should attempt to usurp the supreme authority, he could not be supposed to have equal authority and credit in all the Confederate States. Were he to have too great influence over one, this would alarm the rest. Were he to subdue a part, that which would still remain free might oppose him with forces independent of those which he had usurped, and overpower him before he could be settled in his usurpation. Should a popular insurrection happen in one of the Confederate states, the others are able to quell it. Should abuses creep into one part, they are reformed by those that remain sound. The state may be destroyed on one side and not the other. The Confederacy may be dissolved, and the Confederates preserve their sovereignty. As this government is composed of small republics, it enjoys the eternal happiness of each, and with respect to its external situation, it is possessed by means of association of all the advantages of large monarchies. I have thought it proper to quote at length these interesting passages because they contain a luminous abridgment of the principal arguments in favor of the Union, and most effectually remove the false impressions which a misapplication of other parts of the work was calculated to make. They have at the same time an intimate connection with the more immediate design of this paper, which is to illustrate the tendency of the Union to repress domestic faction and insurrection. And when I was reading that, I'm sitting there, I'm saying, how do we get to the point where we can be in an ability to have our states quell certain problems, certain issues that arise from these so-called insurrections that we have in our modern day age, as opposed to insurrections that happened in the early formings of the Union. How do we continue to cling on to this happiness without in a way transforming into a society that we are not? Because as you said earlier, the end goal of the Democrats is to get rid of a Republican government, replace it with a majority democracy, which would in turn lead to tyrannical one-party rule.
You can tell by the way that they continually promote democracy. It's like they've hoodwinked everybody into believing that democracy is the ultimate virtue when it's really evil. There's nothing good about democracy if it's mob rule.
You know,
And
whenever I see Pelosi saying anything about democracy, do you know what I see? I see,
a
I
phantom.
see, no, I see Chief Palpatine sitting there saying in the Senate, "I love democracy. And I promise you, as Supreme Chancellor, I will lay down that power when this war comes to an end." And
Yeah.
then what happens? He then declares the first galactic empire of the Republic.
Nancy.
That's why I call her Nancy
Yeah.
Palpatine.
Well, that is the
I mean, she looks just
why
like
do you think they're
Palpatine.
freaking called Democrats, dude? Because they just want a direct democracy.
And it's not even like they are the same Democrats as before, because as you know, Jefferson's party was called the Democratic Republican Party.
Yeah.
It was a
And
very clear
but the
distinction.
emphasis was on the Republican part.
Yes, a very clear distinction between what we have now.
Just straight up. And but they claim to be basically the same party.
No, well, we know they aren't. And you know what it does is it perverts the legacy of Jefferson and Jeffersonian uh Democrats, because these people are not Jeffersonians in any way.
No, they're Jefferson was less authoritarian than Hamilton.
Yeah, Jefferson was
Loosely
probably,
speaking, I don't like to use that term because authoritarian is somewhat pejorative, but I'm not using it in that sense.
as far as libertarian is concerned, Jefferson was probably the most libertarian of the founding.
Oh yeah, he thought we'd have to have revolutions like every 15 years or so. Like
Especially when
he
it came
wanted
to
he
getting rid of
really wanted
slavery.
people to be like maximum freedom, like unreasonable levels of freedom.
And I would say the only thing that kept him grounded was his friendship with of John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. That kind of pulled him back into the realm of reality
Yeah.
as it came to that.
Well, he's more radical than a lot of people really know about. In some ways, if you read some of his letters, it's just like, dude, like chill out, man. It's not that serious. Um, honestly, I feel like going over these papers that are on the same subject, we end up just repeating ourselves a lot.
We do, but it is for the education of our viewer base.
So
But
number
now we're
10,
getting ready to go into the largest one that we've read so far, which is by James Madison, and he did write a considerable link for his opening remarks.
not that much longer. Anyway, paper 10, which is the same subject again, but I think that this one out of 6 through 10 is probably the most relevant to us today,
I would
like
agree.
immediately. There are again two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence. The other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. So I'm not going to read all of this because I'd rather just summarize it. Basically, the point he's trying to make is liberty is to faction what air is to fire. So if you extinguish liberty, you can get rid of all faction or domestic uprising. The same way that if you just get rid of air, that'll solve the problem of fire, but then that doesn't solve the problem. Now you have a new problem. Now you don't have any fire and you might need some. You might need to keep warm. You have no liberty, then you can't really do anything with your life. You just have to be told what to do. So that's not the optimal way to solve the problem. Secondly, you could just, in an authoritarian manner, just make everybody at least pretend like they have the same opinions and thoughts, but that would also be a restriction on liberty, and nothing would really be accomplished by either one of these. Basically, there's no ultimate solution to this problem, and I think that's the point he's making.
If you continue reading on to the rest of that sentence, I think that defines the problem with the dichotomy between the left and the right today, right now. And it's the one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence, the other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interest. And in my view, this is the problem that we have right now in our country, is the left, their idea of social justice is cosmic justice, where they are where everybody is supposed to be the carbon copy of the other. The only way to live in their world is to have the same thoughts that they do, the same interests that they do, think the way they think, talk the way they talk, use the pronouns that they want to use, like disregard science when it's convenient the way that they want to. I mean, that that is the danger that we have now, where as one side, the faction of the right, if we can effectually call it a faction, the faction of the right is about personal liberty to each person's individuality, where each person is able to do that for themselves. But then you go to the left's faction, and it's, you have to be with me exactly like I am, or you're not one of us. And you've seen that meme several times, or a GIF, whatever it is, that's on Facebook all the time, where there's the stick figures, and it says something that the left doesn't like, and then the left pushes them over into the right, even though they were never a person on the right in the first place. And that's how the right has become much more than what it was, where it has a lot more extreme views because people who are leftists have been pushed outside of the leftist echo chamber because they dare to think something out of line.
And it just goes to show you that even if you make everybody think the same way, you still don't get rid of faction because there will always be people who refuse to go along.
Exactly. There will always be people who will eventually wake up one day and say, you know what? Nah, this isn't working for me. And then now you have the same problem all over again. Just as you said, you've created an entirely new problem where you at first you eliminated the need for everybody to think differently. Well, now somebody woke up and they thought differently. So now you have a new problem where now it might be better for everybody to think differently.
This is it's an eternal problem for mankind. That's what I mean when I say that the founders have this tragic view of human nature. There's no ultimate solution to the problems. They're only trade-offs.
Yeah, but again, Thomas Sowell says that so brilliantly that
Yes.
trade-offs, that's what you can get. Where it is the left, there are no trade-offs. It's supposed to be perfect. When if
Yes.
you understand human nature and really the world in general, you everything is crap, but you get what you can take and you make the best of it. But whatever you get, you're going to get a problem. For example, if you eat good food, you may live longer. The trade-off is that you have waste as a byproduct. You're going to poop.
The the I don't know why you went there, but
That's as simple as this. It's as simple as analogy that I can make.
anyway, yeah, you don't get to pick the road without suffering, but you get to choose which road. Like
Exactly. You
you have to drink poison, but you get to pick which one.
yeah. Say or you don't get to live life without the consequences in which it brings. Every decision that you make has an outcome, whether the outcome is good or bad. And in many cases, the outcome is both good and bad.
Yeah, it's unclear a lot of times. And sometimes good things can lead to bad things and bad things can lead to good things. And we just never know how things are going to turn out just because we have such a limited window of perception individually. We have to just make the best decisions with the choices we have at hand. And it seems like the left refuses to understand this. They do believe that humankind is perfectible, that man
I
can ultimately be perfected. Ultimately,
I love that you said refuse, because you have to do the same thing that I do, which is admit that the left acknowledges that this is the truth and that this is reality, but they refuse to conform to it.
I think that most of them, I really can't say whether they have to know that what they're saying is preposterous. Like sometimes it's like we've literally reached the point in history where satire and reality intersect. And it's really hard to tell the difference, what's true and what's not, because we just hear so much crazy stuff said that we can't believe it's real.
Yeah,
So
like the idea of killing a baby that's 10 minutes from being born and then trying to say that it was a joke.
it's like,
I,
really, you can't be serious right now. Like, what are you saying? I don't know if these people really believe it or not, but I don't think it's possible to think. It's just some people, they puzzle me by their ability to think irrationally and believe they're totally rational. Like it makes perfect sense. And everybody else is just like, dude, you just said elephants are purple and polka dotted. And you expect me to think that you're telling you, you really expect me to believe that you believe what you're saying? You're telling me that elephants cut down trees with chainsaws and you don't expect me to laugh?
or to use something more grounded in their reality, you're telling me that I'm going to die in the next 2 years if I don't put a cork in every cow's ass to stop them from farting methane gas into the atmosphere.
Yeah. Earth has literally been through billions of years of tumultuous history, and we come along in the last 200 years and we're about to destroy it.
I mean, I don't mean to veer off topic here, but I just got to get this off my chest. Um, the left's plan to stop cows from flatulating, okay, is to get us to stop eating cows. How does that stop the cow from flatulence?
Well, obviously we have to kill all the cows.
So that means we should eat all of the cows, but then what about the farting elephants and the deer and
So
everything
we're
else,
just gonna have to wipe out all life on Earth. There's no other solution. That's
including
really,
ourselves, because we also pass
yes.
gas.
They think we should kill ourselves too. Like that solves the problem. You basically you're like, oh, my house has a insect problem, but it's infested with roaches, so let me burn it down.
Pretty much. Let me run it down while I'm in it.
Man, that's
Uh,
what it's impossible to believe these people really think that they're being coherent.
eh, and I think a lot of the problem is that because they have existed in their own echo chambers for so long, they've never been forced to listen to themselves out loud say that without somebody giving them a participation trophy for being a genius. They never actually had to present that in front of somebody that was not in their echo chamber and laugh them out of existence.
Mm, that's what happens when you have Twitter.
Yeah. But I think Madison also goes on. He says that the latent causes of action are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere brought into different degrees of activity according to the different circumstances of civil society. A zeal of different opinions concerning religion, concerning government, and many other points, as well as speculation of practice and attachment to different leaders ambitiously contending for preeminence and power, or to persons or other descriptions whose fortunes have been interesting to human passions, have in turn divided mankind into parties, inflamed them with mutual animosity, and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. So strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasions presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. But the most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. Those who are creditors and those who are debtors fall under a like discrimination. A land interest, a manufacturing interest, a mercantile interest, a moneyed interest with many lesser interests grow up of necessity in civilized nations and divide them into different classes, accutated by different sentiments and views. The regulation of these various and interfering interests forms the principal task of modern legislation and involves the spirit of party and faction, the endless and the necessary and ordinary operations of government. And I think that is as plain a summation that you can get on this topic of how factions come to be.
I think that this paper is really the philosophy behind why our system is built for gridlock. Everybody has to be pushing in the same direction for something to get done. So that's why this is the feature of the system. And the system is set up in such a way that you can rely on the system. You don't have to rely on the people who occupy the positions.
And so, what do you say to our leftist friends that say this is a flaw of the Constitution?
So It is in vain to say that enlightened statesmen will be able to adjust these clashing interests and render them all subservient to the public good. Enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm. Not in many cases can such adjustment be made at all without taking into view indirect and remote considerations which will rarely prevail over the immediate interest which one party may find in disregarding the rights of another or the good of the whole. The interference to which we are brought is that the causes of faction cannot be removed and that relief is only to be sought in the means of controlling its effects. If a faction consists of less than a majority, relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by regular vote. It may clog the administration, it may convulse the society, but it will be unable to execute and mask its violence under the forms of the Constitution. When a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passions or interests both the public good and the rights of other citizens. To secure the public good and private rights against the danger of such a faction, and at the same time preserve the spirit and the form of popular government, it is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed.
This is the definition of the Electoral College for all of you out there. This is the definition of the Electoral College. Not only is it the definition of the Electoral College, it is the definition of the system of United States government, of the filibuster, of the reason why we need to have 2/3 or 60 votes in the Senate, and the reason why we need to have, or we used to need to have, a 2/3 vote in the House in order to pass legislation around, in order to force commingling of separate factions to all agree on the same thing, pursuant to the same direction, which should ultimately be for the advancement of our country. And where we are right now are in factions, Rhett and I clearly on one side, and the left is clearly on another side. And what we have right now is one side of government is trying to get rid of this system because they want the latter half, which, as my co-host Rhett just read, says that when a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passion. That's number one. It's to sacrifice to its ruling passion, which means that because they are the majority, they can make any rules that they want to at any time, so long as they have enough people to vote for it. But you see that all of the time in Democrat cities. And or interest both the public good and the rights of the citizens. Because let's be perfectly honest, if the majority of the country, according to the 2020 election, were able to pass any bill right now in Congress, you'd be able to kill your child after it was born. You would be able to drive on the streets high on whatever drug you wanted to right now. You would be able to, well, this was years ago. I don't know.
We literally have infinite welfare.
Yes, you will have the legalization in some cases of pedophilia almost because
Yes.
of their maps, they're minor attracted persons. They according to somebody that I had a conversation with, you guys probably seen it on Omar's show, that says that we can't hold pedophiles responsible or rapists responsible for their actions because the instinct to have sex is so strong that human beings can't control it.
Essentially, what they're saying is they are an animal.
Essentially, yeah, they're saying that human beings have no control over their actions, so they can never be responsible for their actions. So government has to be.
Well, that's actually what comes from having an atheistic worldview. Because if you're honest with it, then you know if there is nothing outside of human beings, then anything is permitted. And also, you have no free will anyway, because all you are is
Hey, you're
just
lagging
blind
on me.
matter.
Oh, there you are. But I wrote a piece about this a while ago, and it's the same thing. They they would rather relieve themselves of liberty in order to be held not accountable for their actions and choices that they make. They would rather surrender all liberty and freedom to government so that they don't have to be the one to share the brunt of their responsibility for the mess that they have put themselves in. Somebody else always has to be at fault. They can never be at fault. They can never do no wrong.
So I'm going to go ahead. Essentially, after this point, he just discusses the differences between the Republican government and Democratic government. But the influence of factious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration throughout the other states. A religious sect may degenerate into a political faction and a part of the Confederacy, but the variety of sects dispersed over the entire face of it must secure the national councils against any danger from that source. A rage for paper money, for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project will be less apt to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular member of it, in the same proportion as such a malady is more likely to taint a particular county or district than an entire state. In the extent and proper structure of the Union, therefore, we behold a Republican remedy for the diseases most incident to Republican government. And according to the degree of pleasure and pride we feel in being Republicans, ought to be our zeal in cherishing the spirit and supporting the character of Federalists.
And I think that is a brilliant summary. I mean, obviously he wrote it, but I think it's a brilliant summary to where we are right now as a nation. I mean, this is it's almost like a time capsule that was meant to be opened at this point in history.
I would say it's going to be relevant for any country in this position, but people just don't talk about this enough. Most people have no understanding of the Constitution anyway, so they don't also know that all this has been written to explain the purpose and what they meant by all of it. Like
Honestly,
literally the variety of sex dispersed over the entire. So a rage for paper money, for the abolition of debts or equal division of property. We have all of these things going on right now. Student loan debts, an equal division of property, reparations, a rage for paper money, the COVID stimulus relief checks. People don't want to work, but it's less likely to take over the entire union rather than just one portion of it. And that's true because it hasn't taken over everyone. So
honestly, I think that nobody in Congress has read the Federalist Papers. No current sitting member of Congress has read the Federalist Papers in any degree. Because if they had, we'd be in a much better place.
I feel like they should have to.
They should have to, but they I highly doubt that any of them have read the Federalist. I know for a fact that AOC has not read the Federalist Papers.
She doesn't even know what that is.
She does. I don't even think she reads. Period.
I don't think she can read.
Well, she's from New York, so she might not be able to read. The education system is so horrible.
She doesn't even know how to spell her own name. That's why she writes AOC.
I would not be surprised by that. Like, I don't even know how to spell her name because I've never seen it spelled out before.
mean,
But
I
you
know how
know,
to spell it. I know how to spell it better than she does because she don't know how to spell it at all.
but you know, I can't help but think that if somebody on Capitol Hill had the courage and the guts to just sit there and read the Federalist Papers on C-SPAN and force Congress to sit there and
Do
listen.
that in a filibuster. Just start reading the Federalist Papers.
Yeah, just start reading all of them and force the American people to have to witness it all, rather than doing an 8 hour, 16-hour speech about literally nothing. Because a lot of times the speeches are just nothing. They're just repeating the same point over and over again. When instead you could be educating the American people as to why they should be appalled by how Congress is behaving and making decisions in the fashion that they do, by using the very articles and papers which define our Constitution's meaning. And with
I think we'll
that,
finally be moving on to some different stuff next week.
oh yeah, it'll be fun. But with that, go ahead and wrap us up. Give us a nice, good old summary of the first 10 pages of the Federalist Papers, according to the most astute Rhett Alexander Hamilton Williams.
So, in the general introduction to the Federalist Papers, the first 10 regard the dangers of not joining together as regards to threats, foreign and domestic. The reason that a union would be better when it comes to foreign relations would be, first of all, we won't be fighting with each other. And our enemies are a sea, an ocean away from us, anyone who's likely to come against us. So it would be better to join together so that we don't end up facing threats as substantial as we would as separate confederacies. And when it comes to domestic threats, we would likely be infighting like the nations of Europe, continental Europe, if we were 3 or 4 different countries. Trade could not save us because plenty of historical examples have been given of commercial republics that went to war anyway. Athens, Carthage. And the likelihood of, okay, competing interests cancel each other out, and the likelihood of that idea overtaking the entirety of the country rather than just one small part of it is unlikely. So there's no way to solve the problems of parties and factions, but the best trade-off that we have is a system that controls those interests. And in order for anything to get done, everybody has to be pushing in the same direction. Otherwise, nothing happens.
I think that is an accurate summary of these papers. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us on this stream here on this wonderful Sunday night. We don't usually stream on Sunday nights, but we wanted to do this. We wanted to just have a little bit more time to read over the papers and make sure that we gave you guys the best take that we could give you on our opinions on the Federalist Papers. Please follow us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Truth Social. Uh, Download the podcast and share it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, anywhere else that you can find us. The Story of America with Payson Williams, The Story of America PW. You can find us everywhere that podcasts are available. Pretty much, we're available on I think 7 platforms. So give us a try, and I'm going to be trying something new soon. I'll run it by Rhett when I figure out how it's going to work, and we'll figure out how it's going to happen. But I'm going to be trying something new soon. Won't be this week. It won't be next week, but it'll be sometime soon. And I'll let you guys know when I finally come up with that decision. But with that, we'll see you guys next time, and we hope